Serious, diverse of Reddit. What is your most horrifying experience underwater? One of my earliest dives was an absolute nightmare. The current was insanely strong, and the water was so filled with sand and debris that visibility was barely a foot. Somehow, the dive master kept insisting, "It'll clear up once we get below 40 feet." We began our descent along the guide wire, but by the time we hit around 55 feet, my brother and I, dive buddies, couldn't see anyone else in the group. We waited at the bottom of the line for a good 10 minutes, but nobody showed. Slowly, we realized the rest of the group must have stayed at the surface. When we finally surfaced, we found only one guy from our group hanging by the buoy, looking totally lost, and the boat was nowhere in sight. Apparently, the conditions were so rough that the boat had to move away to avoid crashing on top of us, but the swells were too big, and the crew couldn't find us again. We ended up drifting for about an hour before finally catching the boat's attention and getting rescued. It was easily the worst bout of motion sickness and dehydration I've ever had. A 16-year-old boy was found face down at 50 feet, lifeless. He had been searching for his 17-year-old friend after they got separated underwater, breathing through his tank as he looked for him. Tragically, the other boy didn't survive either. It was a devastating day on that beach. The Coast Guard and a dive boat recovered both young lives in front of about 30 families and children who had been enjoying the beautiful weather. The loss was heartbreaking for everyone there. During a wreck dive in the ST, Lawrence, my buddy, ran out of air on me. Thankfully, it was a no decompression dive under 100 feet, and we weren't inside the wreck itself. But the real challenge was the location. The wreck sits right in the middle of a busy shipping lane where massive freighters pass through, and the current is incredibly strong. We couldn't just make a straightforward ascent to the surface. Instead, we had to navigate along a network of thick ropes anchored firmly to the seabed. These lines give divers something solid to hold on to, helping us fight the current on the way to the wreck and stabilizing us as we swim back to the anchor line. As we were exiting, everything was going smoothly. My buddy was on my long, 7-foot hose positioned out in front, and I kept a steady hand on his knee to stay connected. But then, in a split second, when I let go of his knee to adjust some gear, he got swept off the line by the current, and that ripped my regulator out of his mouth. I saw him grab another line downstream, hanging on for dear life, completely upside down, right there in the shipping lane, no regulator in his mouth, and no air in his tank, flapping wildly in the current like a flag. I rushed toward him as fast as I could, while staying safe myself, grabbing the abandoned regulator and hose along the way. When I reached him, I managed to get the regulator back in his mouth, but since he was inverted, it was upside down and didn't work right. He fixed it himself, but then lost his grip on the line. I caught him quickly, but had to let go of the line to do so. To keep us both from drifting away, I hooked both my feet around the line and somehow managed to pull us back to a secure spot. That's when another diver in our group noticed the situation and came to help. From there, we were able to safely make it back to the boat without any further problems. I was about 30 meters down, exploring a small shipwreck when my tank lightly bumped the ceiling. Suddenly, my jacket started inflating on its own, which meant I was rapidly ascending, a really dangerous situation. I realized something was wrong when I couldn't deflate my jacket no matter what I tried. I had to fight hard, swimming down with everything I had to reach some fellow divers nearby, but the strong effort burned through my oxygen faster than I wanted. Finally, I managed to cut off the airflow from my tank to the jacket, which allowed me to deflate it manually. For the rest of the dive, I had to inflate it by hand. On another dive with a group of beginners, the current picked up underwater and caused some chaos. One diver got sick and was about to vomit. He started to take off his mask, but the instructor quickly swam over and placed her hand on his mask, forcing him to vomit into his regulator instead. And then, to top it all off, another diver spotted a moray eel and pointed it out, only to get bitten by the eel. I was on a wreck dive off Oahu, about 90 feet down, with my ex-girlfriend and the owner of a local dive shop. My ex and I were both experienced divers, and we were just exploring the wreck and checking out some nearby turtles. There had been a group on the wreck earlier, but they left as we descended, so it was just the three of us. About halfway through the dive, another diver appeared alone. He got the dive shop owner's attention, and after some frantic writing on slates, the owner came over to us and wrote, "You two stay down and finish your dive." I'm taking him up. Then he handed the guy his octopus regulator to breathe from. We didn't really know what was happening, so we carried on with our dive, took some great pictures, and ascended as usual. Back on the boat, we learned the full story. That lone diver was from a completely different boat and dive site. Somehow, he'd gotten separated and lost, drifting about a mile away from where he started. The current was pushing him out to sea, nothing but open water in that direction, not even land until Tahiti thousands of miles away. The worst part? His boat didn't even realize he was missing and left without him. If he hadn't drifted past our wreck, who knows what might have happened? The current out there pushes you away from shore, and since no one knew he was gone, he could have been floating out there for a very long time before anyone noticed. I was drift diving off the shelf in Cozumel, about 110 feet down, when my partner and I completely lost track of our depth. A pretty rookie mistake, I know. By the time we started our ascent, we only had around 300 psi left in the tank and had to do 2 safety stops. Luckily, we had a can of spare air with us, good for about 45 breaths. During the safety stops, I noticed it was getting harder and harder to breathe from my tank. That's never a good sign. We finally made it to the surface with less than 100 psi left. Thankfully, I didn't get any nitrogen sickness. That was intense. Coming up from a dive in Indonesia, I had no idea a sea snake was surfacing for air at the exact same time until I broke the surface. Suddenly, everyone on the boat started yelling, "Snake!" I stayed as far away as I could, and thankfully, the snake slipped back underwater. Still, it freaked me out how close it had been. If they hadn't warned me, I might have bumped right into it. On the second dive, I spotted that same snake again. It actually followed me for a bit, which made my skin crawl even more. I was on a multi-day diving trip in Belize with my girlfriend. It was her first trip after getting certified as an open water diver. We had just completed a dive at the Blue Hole, along with a few other spots. Because of the depth and the number of dives, we needed to do a decompression stop for about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of that last dive. During that dive, somewhere between 45 and 60 feet down, my girlfriend started struggling with water leaking in her mask. She began to panic and slowly drifted upward, pointing frantically at her mask. I could see she was really upset, but trying to communicate that she needed to stay down and not surface prematurely was incredibly difficult. When she reached about 15 feet, I had no choice but to physically grab her and pull her back down. She had some air trapped in her BCD, which was making things worse, so I cleared it out and kept pulling her down. It was terrifying, No one wants to risk the bends. Later on the boat, she thought I was mad at her for not keeping up with the group, not realizing I was trying to help her through her mask problem and keep her safe. It was a scary situation, but thankfully we made it through. I know a guy who was diving for crayfish, lobsters hide under the rocks near the ocean floor. While he was underwater, a tiger shark suddenly emerged from a nearby cave and rammed him, breaking his arm and ribs. Despite the injuries, he managed to climb onto the rocks just in time, escaping any further attack. He later said the shark was probably just testing him out. I was diving off the coast of California near a kelp bed inside a beautiful marine preserve. The underwater scenery there is absolutely stunning. But then I came across an area that looked completely wrecked, sand churned up and plants trampled. Apparently, a dive club had come through and carved a path of destruction. They pulled up abalone and sand dollars as souvenirs, leaving the seabed in terrible shape. Normally, I'm not one to get upset about that kind of thing, but this is a protected marine preserve meant for diving, and they left it way worse than they found it. On my very first dive, the strap on my rental goggles snapped, and they floated away. I wasn't exactly scared, but being 50 feet underwater with no vision was definitely disorienting. I kept tapping my tank, which makes a distinct noise underwater to get my dive group's attention. Luckily, they quickly handed me a replacement mask, and we carried on with the dive. I can totally see how this could make someone panic, but I trusted my group and my training, and their response was fast, no more than 15 to 20 seconds. That really made all the difference. About 10 to 15 years ago, I was doing my potty open water course in Australia. Aside from the hilarious encounters with jellyfish, Aussies, and, worst of all, other Brits, I had an amazing dive. The water was warm and crystal clear, the seas calm, and there were plenty of fish around, exactly what you hope for. But I was having some trouble equalizing. It wasn't terrible, just a little distracting, so I pushed on. As we ascended, the discomfort started to increase. Still, it wasn't unbearable, just more noticeable. Once back on the boat, the pain lingered, so I mentioned it to the dive master. He waved it off, saying it was probably just a bubble of water stuck in my ear. Sound fine, right? Except it didn't feel wet. It felt solid, and it hurt a lot. I couldn't help but keep sticking my fingers in my ear, hoping to fix it. Then, suddenly, as I pulled my pinky out, I felt a scraping sensation. There, perched on my finger like he owned the place, was a tiny crab. I looked at him, he looked at me. I glanced at the other divers, they looked horrified. Then the crab, as if to say cheerio, gave a little claw wave before scuttling off my finger, across the deck, and disappearing behind some gear. I spent the rest of the trip convincing myself he hadn't laid eggs or left a few friends behind. He didn't, thankfully. And I couldn't help but wonder, why on earth do we have crab holes built into our stupid heads? One of my most terrifying experiences as a diver has been witnessing just how underqualified and unaware some divers, and even dive professionals, can be. On a Palau live-aboard, for example, I'm pretty sure a girl had no clue about decompression limits. She literally just dove until her air ran out. Every dive, the rest of US could hear her dive watch beeping furiously, an unmistakable warning sign. Then, there was a dive off Charleston where a dive instructor seemed oblivious or indifferent to a clearly panicked diver in his group. The wreck we were on was resting at an odd angle, creating a vertigo effect, and the surge kicked up a lot of silt. I wasn't in their group, but right at the start, I saw this guy sprinting toward the mooring line in panic. I ended my dive early and ascended with him. When he hugged me at the surface, I almost teared up and honestly wanted to punch that instructor for not stepping in. Another upsetting moment was in Nevis, where I saw dive masters roughly handling marine life. One even grabbed a porcupine fish to make it puff up. That kind of behavior is just unacceptable. But despite these experiences, recreational diving remains an incredible and very safe activity when done properly. If anyone reading this is thinking about learning to dive, don't let these stories scare you off. The underwater world is truly amazing. After a full day of boat diving in Monterey Bay along the California coast, we had a night dive planned. I was there with two friends celebrating my birthday, part of a bigger group on a chartered boat. My friends were too tired to join the night dive, and honestly, I was feeling wiped out too, but I was invited to buddy up with another diver whose friends also opted to stay on the boat. Looking back, being tired at night, diving through a kelp forest with someone I didn't know well was not the best combo. As I followed my new buddy through the dense kelp, some strands snagged on my tank. I tried to free myself, but only ended up more tangled, so much so that I couldn't move at all. I kept shining my light, searching for my buddy, but he was nowhere in sight. What felt like an eternity, probably just a few minutes, passed until I finally felt the kelp start to loosen. Then I saw him, cutting the kelp free with his knife. After all the struggling, I was completely exhausted. When we surfaced, he had to tow me back to the boat. I ran out of air about 12 to 15 feet down during a dive on a rig in the Gulf of Mexico. This was only my third dive outing since getting recertified. I had taken a semester of diving in college, but never really kept it up afterward. The first dive that morning went smoothly. On the second dive, the dive master asked the group to let him know when the first person hit 800 psi, so we could start ascending to the safety stop at 15 feet, then surface. I was the first to reach 800. During the safety stop, I suddenly realized breathing was getting really hard, and then it stopped altogether. I surfaced as quickly as I could, but was gasping for air. It turned out my regulator malfunctioned and froze at the 800 psi mark. When they checked the tank back on the boat, it was completely empty. The equipment was rented. If I hadn't been paying attention or had stayed down even a few minutes longer, well, things could have gone much worse. Looking back, the entire dive had safety issues. There are divers with thousands of dives who never face a problem, but in my opinion, diving is a skill that needs regular practice. It's easy to forget critical steps, and in a challenging environment, things can go bad fast. So dive safe out there. My partner and I went on a resort dive in St. Martin. We're both certified, but forgot to bring our certification cards. There were only two other divers, a couple, plus the dive master and boat captain, so a really small group. After watching the safety video and doing a couple of practice mask clears and regulator finds in the pool, we headed out for a 35-foot dive. The dive master told my partner and me to go down first, follow the rope, sit on our knees at the bottom, then the other couple would join, followed by the DM. We'd clear masks and do regulator finds, then explore. My partner and I got to the bottom, and the woman from the other couple made it down too. But the guy just couldn't stay down. He kept floating back up. The dive master kept pulling him down, but he'd float off again. Finally, the DM dragged him to our area and pushed him onto his knees in the sand, where he finally stayed. We did the clears and regulator finds and set off. But this guy still struggled badly with buoyancy control. He was crashing into me, his girlfriend, and my partner constantly. About 20 minutes into the dive, he gave up and went back to the boat with his girlfriend. My partner and I finished the dive, saw some eagle rays, watched the DM spear a couple of lionfish, and even spotted a turtle. A great dive for us. Back on the boat, I tried to be nice and said to the guy, "Sorry you had such trouble with buoyancy. It's rough bouncing around like that." I shared how it took me a few dives to get it down. His girlfriend then chimed in. He did great considering he'd never been in the water before yesterday and doesn't know how to swim. I had to hold myself and rely on my partner's strong grip to stop from losing it on them and the dive master. But seriously, who signs up for diving if they can't swim? Fast forward a few months, we were taking a refresher dive course. On the first night, everyone jumped in the pool to swim 8 laps and show they could tread water. Walking to the pool, I joked, "Everyone here knows how to swim, right?" Everyone laughed, except one guy who admitted he didn't. Our DM was fantastic. He taught the guy how to doggy paddle and told him he could stick to the shallow end while learning to swim throughout the course. By the end, the guy was certified and swimming. Now, whenever I get on a dive boat, I always ask if everyone knows how to swim. Surfing, well, close enough to a dive story. I was out alone, or so I thought, on a stormy, pretty big day. Too early for the lifeguards to be on duty. The sky was cloudy, the water choppy, with waves around 5 feet or more. Could have been a fun day. I was paddling out when suddenly a big set broke a couple hundred feet ahead of me. No problem, I planned to duck under it. But as the wave got closer, my gut screamed, "Turn around, get out of the way, go!" So, as I dove under, I turned my head and braced myself. Bam! Something slammed into the back of my head, so hard I think I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was underwater about 10 feet down with my head touching the sand. I was completely dazed and confused, couldn't tell which way was up. For a moment, I actually thought the sand was land until it hit me. I couldn't breathe. Desperately, I grabbed my leash and crawled my way back to my board, only to get smashed by another wave and sent under again. This cycle repeated a few times. When I finally surfaced, I felt the back of my head. It was bleeding profusely, and something jagged was sticking out. I tried paddling back in, but I was dizzy and disoriented, probably from concussion. I couldn't stay balanced on my board. I threw up and yelled for help, but there was no one around. Exhausted, bleeding, and scared, especially because my neighbor had been killed by a great white in the exact same spot a few years earlier. I just clung to the side of my board and let the waves carry me in. Eventually, I made it to shore and lay down. After a while, lifeguards arrived and I told them what happened. They rushed me to the ER, where they pulled a 3-inch chunk of surfboard nose out of my head and confirmed I'd fractured my skull. Oh, and apparently there was someone else out there that day with me, but I never saw him. During a night dive, as part of my training, we were instructed to cut off all our light sources. Suddenly, everything went pitch black. I couldn't tell which way was up, and I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. But then, out of the darkness, hundreds of eyes appeared, glowing and staring back at me. What they belonged to? No idea. It was both eerie and unforgettable. I was doing my advanced open water course at Dutch Springs in Pennsylvania. The plan was to dive from a school bus wreck to a sunken helicopter in the quarry. I was with my advanced group, 2 dive masters, and my stepbrother was my dive buddy. I swam inside the bus, then back out, but suddenly no one from my group was there. Panic started creeping in, but thankfully my training kicked in and I stayed calm. There were ropes connecting the vehicles to guide divers, so I figured I could follow those. Still at the bus, a group of divers came back toward me. I thought that must be my group, but after checking their tanks and fins, I realized it wasn't them at all. That's when real panic set in. I checked my bearings and remembered the shore was northeast, the direction we entered. I grabbed a rope pointing that way and began swimming alone, feeling like I was pulling myself along for what seemed like 10 to 20 minutes. In reality, it was only about 5. When I surfaced near the shore, I saw my family getting ready to dive. I told them what happened, and after 20 to 30 minutes, my original dive group surfaced nearby. Instead of being surprised I'd been missing, they just asked how the dive went. Neither my stepbrother nor anyone else realized I'd been gone. Looking back, it was truly terrifying, especially for my 17-year-old self, to think that if something had gone wrong, no one would have known or come to help. When I was around 15 or 16, I got the chance to earn my advanced open water potty certification. As part of the course, you choose 3 specialties to expand your skills. I picked fish identification, deep diving, and night diving. My group decided to join me for the last 2, so we planned a big night dive, going over 100 feet deep. We dove off Catalina Island, just off California's coast, one of the best dive spots in the world. The water visibility was incredible, at least 40 feet, and the colors of marine life were stunning. Plus, the dense kelp forests made it even more exciting. Though, that night, the kelp became part of a terrifying ordeal. Night diving means using flashlights to see in total darkness. My plan was to use this dive to get some nighttime sea life ID that I couldn't during the day, hoping to squeeze in a 4th specialty and get closer to rescue diver and dive master certifications. Everyone knew my plan, and we set off with our dive master. The first 30 minutes were amazing. Clear water, tons of sea life, a warm summer night. I was identifying fish left and right, showing the group what I saw. Then, at around 130 feet, things went south. I was second in line behind the dive master, and my friend was third. We could tell my buddy was starting to get nervous, which makes sense. We were at night, deep, and only basic certified, which typically limits you to 75 feet. My friend wanted to move ahead, signaling me, and I told him to go on for his comfort and safety. But we were in the kelp forest, where your flashlight is your lifeline for signaling and navigation. The dive master signaled that there was a rock or cave to our left that we shouldn't approach. It wasn't safe, and we weren't certified for penetration. But my buddy misread the signal. Thinking the dive master was already ahead and out of sight, he panicked a little, turned sharply, and kicked hard to follow what he thought was a clear path. In doing so, he accidentally kicked me in the face with his fin. My mask was nearly ripped off, and worst of all, my regulator was knocked out of my mouth. There I was 130 feet down, cold water flooding my face, no mask, no regulator, and no visibility in the kelp forest. Panic hit me hard. I replayed every bit of my training in my head, trying to figure out what to do. Normally, recovering your regulator means turning your body to the side the hose comes from and sweeping your arm down to grab it, but all I could feel was kelp. After a few terrifying moments, I remembered my BCD exhausts air from my tank. With that thought, I slowly began ascending, carefully letting out air to breathe. Even though I was panicking and breathing fast, I didn't need much air since I wasn't exerting myself. After a few minutes, I reached a less dense part of the kelp forest and finally found my regulator. I purged it, put my mask back on, and cleared it. Looking down, I saw 2 flashlights searching for me. I flashed my light back, and my dive master and buddy came up about 15 feet and asked if I was okay. I signaled that I was stressed but all right. I even pulled out my fish ID slate and wrote a quick note explaining what had happened, then showed them my air gauge. I had just enough air to reach the surface safely, but we took it slow, doing buddy breathing on a controlled ascent to avoid nitrogen bubbles. Once we surfaced, I explained what had happened. I even got part of my rescue diver certification signed off for the distress diver recovery. It was one of the scariest and most frantic dives I've ever done. Definitely not something I want to repeat on purpose, but it's one of my most vivid memories underwater. Back in 1999, I was still a fairly inexperienced diver, around 500 dives and 300 hours underwater, with limited technical experience. I was asked to be the cleanup man during a night dive on a submerged World War II plane wreck in Budden Lake, a hydroelectric reservoir with depths around 125 feet and visibility varying from nearly 0 to 20 feet, depending on thermoclines. Our group of 12 divers descended 2 by 2 on a dive line dropped onto the wreck. Each of us had roughly 8 minutes on the bottom. Everything went smoothly until my ascent. I was last on a line, detangling the anchor weight from the wreck, watching my dive buddy about 15 to 20 feet above me. Then, at exactly 101 feet, I felt a light touch on my shoulder, and suddenly I couldn't move. My ascent stopped dead. Within seconds, my buddy's light vanished in the murky water above me. I swept my flashlight upward, desperate to catch his beam. Nothing. I realized I was completely alone, stuck. The dive line had drifted into a stand of submerged trees, and my regulator and BCD lines were hopelessly tangled in thick branches. I was totally and utterly stuck. 2 minutes passed, and I knew my buddy wouldn't be coming back. He was 13 minutes and 2 decompression stops away from the surface, while I was trapped with only 16 minutes of air remaining. I still can't quite fathom how 15-foot long tree limbs, for 5 inches thick, waterlogged for 70 years, could so thoroughly entangle me without warning. I tried breaking them, no luck. They bent like rubber. Tried cutting with my knife, nope, it just bounced off. Finally, I took stock of my gear and tied my hull bag's drag line on my waist and the dive line. I unhooked from my BCD and spent the next 7 minutes painstakingly freeing my tank and regulator lines. I rigged my tank to my left arm and cut my BCD free from the branches. I scribbled a desperate message on my grease board. Emergency. Drop full tanks online now. Send help. Then I inflated my BCD, detached it, and sent it shooting to the surface. Exhausted, stressed, and running low on air, I dragged myself along the hull bag line, tank strapped to my arm, to reach the 70-foot decompression stop. By then, I was 12 minutes overdue for the first stop and dangerously low on air, maybe 2 minutes left. I faced a grim choice: attempt a rapid ascent or hold on and climb the rope slowly. I chose slow. Arm over arm, no faster than my bubbles. Exhale was my last conscious thought before blacking out around 65 feet. My computer had underestimated my air consumption and dive time. When I came to, I had a regulator in my mouth and was surrounded by about 50 other divers during a 14-minute decompression stop at 80 feet. Tank swaps followed at 60 feet for 17 minutes, then another at 35 feet for 19 minutes, and finally a full tank at 9 feet, where I breathed deeply for nearly 40 minutes before finally climbing out. That night on the pontoon, as I tried to steady my shaking hands, the reality hit me hard. I had come terrifyingly close to death. I also realized something incredible. 8 divers had gone back down for me after spotting my floating BCD, risking their lives to save a stranger. To those heroes from the Button B, 29 missions, David, Shelley Scott, Matt Bryan, Mike Rue, and Chris, thank you doesn't begin to cover it. Your beers are forever on me. Diving is an amazing sport, and 99.9% of the time, it's smooth sailing. But when things go sideways, be prepared. Always have a buddy plan. Always have redundancy in your buddy plan. Dive with buddies you trust to make the right decisions, even when the unexpected happens. I've been diving for 15 years now. I've experienced it all: narcosis, decompression sickness, the bends, and even a brush with death. I've been attacked by sharks, Goliath groupers, moray eels, and barracudas. Stung by sea urchins and lionfish. I've seen some seriously scary stuff. If anyone wants, I'm happy to share any of those wild tales. But the single most terrifying moment happened on my 17th birthday. My dad took me spearfishing, a family tradition. I was about 75 feet down at the top of a 45-foot wreck, so the bottom was around 115 feet. That's exactly the depth where things start getting seriously risky, both with gas toxicity and decompression limits. I made a rookie mistake. I wrapped the line from my spear around my wrist so I could pull the fish in closer at the bottom. Big mistake. The fish, an absolute beast, started bolting toward the surface, dragging me with it. Up and down, up and down. My dive computer was screaming at me. Ceiling, stop, slow down. My nitrogen levels were climbing faster than my heart pounding in my chest. Eventually, the fish tired and swam back toward the wreck. I snagged my spear gun on a rusty beam, took a moment to catch my breath, and realized just how close I'd come to blacking out. My head was pounding, my ears felt like they were going to implode and explode at the same time from all the pressure changes, and blood was filling my mask from a burst vessel in my nose. I should have died right there. The fish, though exhausted, wasn't done. It still fought hard, but the line held. I pulled out my dive knife and started swimming down the line toward him. He was sluggish now, circling lazily at the end of the 20-foot line. I saw the spear was just inches from slipping free, and I had to act fast. I forced the spear point into the sandy bottom to pin him down. The moment I touched him, the fight exploded all over again. This time, it was up close and personal. I wrapped my legs around him like a rodeo rider holding on for dear life, trying to find the perfect spot for my knife. My knees locked around the spear, with the fish caught between us like a kebab. I took one jab. The knife deflected off his skull. Those things have ridiculously tough heads. One more try, and somehow the blade stuck. The fish went from thrashing bronco to dead weight in an instant. I was low on air, utterly exhausted. I wrapped the line around my spear gun and left the spear embedded in the fish, knife still in its skull. Slowly, carefully, I made my way up, taking the longest decompression stop my remaining air would allow. We ended up with over 65 pounds of meat from that fish and ate like kings for days. This is the first time I've ever told that story. If my dad ever found out how close I came to disaster, he'd probably never let me dive on his boat again. About 10 years ago, when I was still a fairly young diver, I took a trip down to Florida to dive the reefs off Boynton Beach and explore some wrecks in the Keys. One of the highlights was the Spiegel Grove, a legendary wreck, and another great dive was on the Captain Tony. I was diving with a well-known outfit around Largo and Tavernier. The weather was perfect, sunny skies, calm seas, and the boat was moderately crowded. Since I was solo, I teamed up informally with the guy sitting next to me on the boat. He'd been diving for 5 years, but this was only his 30th log dive and his very first wreck dive. The shop required him to hire a guide for this first wreck experience. The guide was an instructor who had a couple of students with him working on their advanced open water deep and wreck certifications. My new dive buddy was assigned to this instructor, so I decided to tag along with the instructor, his 2 students, and my buddy. When we arrived at the grove, the current was ripping. We had to pull ourselves along a line against the current to reach the mooring ball, then descend the line down to the ship's bridge at about 70 feet. Before we entered the water, the instructor laid out the plan. He'd go down the rope first, followed by his 2 students, then me, and finally my buddy. We were all supposed to meet at the bottom and then explore the wreck together. The current was strong all the way down. Once we hit the bridge, I immediately noticed 2 things. First, the instructor and his students weren't waiting for us at the bottom, and second, my buddy's tank had slipped out of his BC strap and was dangling in the current, probably headed toward Miami. I managed to signal to him that there was a problem, turned him around, and started working on his tank strap, which was twisted into a Houdini-level knot around his first stage. After about 10 tense minutes, an eternity at that depth, and with my air rapidly depleting thanks to nerves, I got the strap back around the tank. It wasn't as tight as I'd like, since a plastic spacer piece had apparently floated away. We stayed down a bit longer, then began our ascent. Luckily, the strap held all the way back to the boat. Later, I found out his regulator had cracked, and halfway up, he was inhaling water with every breath. His gear was pretty worn out. As for the instructor, he didn't show back up until we were all on the boat. In the end, everything worked out okay, but if I were my buddy, I'd be pretty annoyed that my guide wasn't there at the bottom watching out for me. I managed to fix the tank strap on my own, but there was a moment when I really could have used an extra hand. Fun times underwater. I did one of those shark diving experiences in the Bahamas. You know, where you sit on the ocean floor in a semicircle with a group of divers while a guy in a heavy chainmail suit feeds sharks dead fish. No cage, just open water. Beforehand, they warn you not to move and to keep your hands close to your body so the sharks don't mistake them for food. For some reason, my air hose, the line running from my tank on my back to my regulator, was unusually long and had formed a big loop that floated way above my head. Then suddenly, I felt a strong tug on the line and a huge, powerful creature struggling right on my back. One of the sharks had somehow gotten caught in that loop. Panic hit hard. I clenched my regulator between my teeth as tightly as I could, terrified it might be ripped free and leave me gasping underwater without air. For what felt like an eternity, about 10 seconds, the shark thrashed, pulling and twisting. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the shark freed itself. In those 10 seconds, I was sure I was about to either have my head bitten open or lose my regulator entirely. Hands down, the most terrifying moment of my life. I was just a 10-year-old kid out on a snorkeling boat tour with my dad. We just finished our first stop and we're heading to the next one. Feeling a little braver after about 20 minutes in the water, I started swimming a bit away from my dad and the group, chasing after this gorgeous rainbow fish that caught my eye. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a shark appeared and snapped up the fish in one quick gulp. I completely freaked out. I spun around and swam back to the boat as fast as I could, all the while getting scolded for splashing too much. Shaken, I climbed back aboard, grabbed my towel, a snack, and a soda, and hid out on the boat. When my dad returned, I just told him I was tired and didn't want to snorkel anymore. He was puzzled. One minute, I'd been the happiest kid on board, the next completely silent. Later, my dad overheard someone say, "Hey, did anyone see that hammerhead?" That's when it all clicked for him. He asked me if I'd seen the shark, and I admitted it had eaten my rainbow fish. Me? Traumatized. Dad? Absolutely hysterical with laughter. On my very first night dive, we were exploring a formation called Sunken Rock, a towering column that plunges down to about 110 feet. The plan was to stay above 60 feet, but I got completely mesmerized by the vibrant colors of the reef. Before I knew it, I had slipped down to 100 feet. To make matters worse, my dive partner had disappeared somewhere around the rock. Panic set in as I couldn't find the rest of our group. For a few terrifying minutes, I was alone in the dark, heart pounding, unsure where to go. Then, out of the murky blackness, I spotted the familiar glow of their dive lights. I was relieved to find my partner safe and sound. Thankfully, I'd only been at that depth for about a minute, but those few moments of panic felt like an eternity. This wasn't a moment underwater, but it still left me breathless. A couple of years after my last dive, I stumbled across a text message my so-called best friend had sent to my husband the day before one of my dives. They were talking about some physical activities they'd recently done together, and then she said something chilling, how convenient it would be if I had an accident while diving, so they could be together all the time. Reading that, the shock hit me like a wave. I couldn't believe someone I trusted could say something so cold and hurtful behind my back. Back in 1992, I was a dive master on a liveaboard in the Bahamas, diving at a spot called Eric's Blue Hole. Our boat, the Miss Lindsay, was a big steel crew boat converted for diving, running out of Virginia Beach in Freeport. In those days, there were no mooring buoys, so our standard practice was to drop a line with a wreck hook, a giant treble hook, wrap it carefully around the base of a coral head, and hook it back onto itself. Done right, it wouldn't harm the coral. On a choppy day, I took the line down, looped it around the coral head, and hooked it in place. The boat was bouncing hard on the surface, tugging the line tight. I watched it for a minute, satisfied it would hold and wasn't damaging the coral, then started to ascend back up the line. Just as I passed over the coral head, the boat lurched violently. The wreck hook snapped free and shot through the water like a rocket, straight at me. I saw it coming, looked down right as it flew, but had no chance to react. By habit, I clipped my dive computer across my chest on my BC to keep it close and out of the way. Pure luck had it positioned perfectly. The hook slammed right into the center of my dive computer, tearing it apart, then bounced off my mask just at the left eye, pulling it off my face, and then continued on its chaotic path. I came out of it without a single scratch or bruise. I managed to grab my mask and noticed my dive computer was destroyed, though luckily it didn't cause a free flow. That hook could easily have hit my heart, my eye, or damaged my air supply, and yet somehow I escaped all of that. I made a careful, safe ascent, though I'm sure I sucked down most of my tank's air in sheer panic before I got to the surface. When I did my Compass certification dive, we entered the water from the beach. Our instructor told us where to go and said, "You'll know if you're on course. There will be something to see." My buddy and I swam over a mound of rock, and suddenly we came face to face with about 20 baby dolls, each with cinder blocks tied to their feet, eerily floating in the water. Some of them were the kind with blinking eyes, which made the whole scene even more unsettling. Now, maybe to others it seemed like no big deal, a strange sight, but nothing more. But for me and the other woman in the group, it was deeply disturbing. A couple of the guys said they understood how we felt and agreed it was totally inappropriate. Whether they were genuinely shocked or just trying to be kind, I don't know. But it really shook me. To this day, the only nightmares I have about my own children are about them drowning and me being unable to save them as they sink. I'm not sure if that haunting dive experience planted the seed for those fears, but it left a lasting impact. It was awful. I was doing a deep dive off the coast of New York, exploring a German U-boat wreck sitting around 200 feet down. The wreck was covered in rusty, corrugated metal hanging in dangerous, tangled sheets. I was diving solo, but there were two others on the dive, a father and his son. After about 10 minutes at depth, I decided to ascend early to minimize decompression time. But 50 minutes later, they still hadn't come up. The captain sent me back down to check on them. When I reached them, I found the son trapped beneath a heavy piece of metal, with his father frantically trying to free him. I helped lift the metal off the boy, but it was clear they were both in panic. With dangerously high nitrogen levels, the worst thing they could do was make a sudden ascent. I knew that if they bolted to the surface, the bends would almost certainly be fatal. We made our way to the mooring line, and I began buddy breathing with both the son and father, who were desperately low on air. After the father took a long breath, the son suddenly lost control and shot to the surface. The father tried to follow, and I grabbed onto his BCD while hooking my feet on the mooring line to hold him back. But he slipped free and launched after his son. At the surface, everyone knew something was terribly wrong. The swells were massive, easily 10 feet, and getting back on the boat was a struggle. When they finally got both father and son aboard, the father was barely alive, his whole body numb and then unconscious. The Coast Guard arrived by helicopter, but the father had already passed away. The captain insisted they take the son immediately to the hyperbaric chamber, but instead, precious time was lost struggling to load the father's body onto the helicopter. The weight and rough seas made it incredibly difficult. By the time they got the son into the chamber, it was too late. He had died too. Maybe it wasn't terrifying in the grand scheme of things, but at the time, I was totally freaked out. We were on our last dive to get certified and had to complete a few tasks underwater. One of them was to take off your mask, put it back on, and clear the water out. When it was my turn, I quickly pulled my mask off and then put it back on, but no matter what I did, it kept leaking. My buddy and I were swimming around checking out the reef, but I was starting to panic a bit because something was wrong with my mask 60 feet down. My stress kept building and I was breathing harder, which meant I was going through air way too fast. Eventually, I ran low and had to call it, so we surfaced early. Back on the boat, I realized that when I pulled my mask off and then back on, my ponytail had gotten tangled around the strap at the back, ruining the seal. I felt awful for cutting my buddy's last dive short and kept apologizing. It wasn't nearly as wild as coming face to face with a shark, but in that moment, it really shook me. I'm a dive instructor, but once on a fun dive, I noticed a diver in our group showing almost every classic sign of stress throughout the dive. She wasn't my buddy, but I still felt responsible for her, so I stuck close and discreetly let the guide know she was struggling. At the end of the dive, we were hanging out about 5 meters below the boat, with roughly 15 meters of water beneath us. Someone was communicating with the dive master, but the guide didn't notice the woman suddenly swimming downward with her hands stretched out toward the bottom. As a pro, I knew something was seriously wrong, so I immediately went after her. She grabbed onto a table coral with a white-knuckle grip so hard that the branches broke under her hands. For non-divers reading this, it's pretty clear things are going downhill fast. Even though I was trained extensively for emergencies, I never witnessed anything like this firsthand, and as a fresh instructor, I was freaking out inside. I reached her and grabbed her shoulder. She spun around to face me, and the look on her face still haunts me. It was pure terror and panic. Her eyes were huge and vacant, pupils dilated, her face pale even for a Northern European, and worst of all, her regulator was out of her mouth. Without thinking, I jammed my backup regulator back in, and she clung to me like something out of a cheesy horror movie, only it was a tall, panicked Danish woman instead of an octopus. After what felt like forever struggling to control her arms, she suddenly switched panic modes and surged toward the surface. I spread my legs wide to slow our ascent and kept her regulator firmly in place until we reached the surface. Once we surfaced, Her physical panic subsided, though she was sobbing. The dive master helped us back to the boat, where her fellow Danes calmed her down. She later explained she had run out of air because her anxiety caused rapid breathing. That led to a full-blown panic attack, and she couldn't remember anything until surfacing. I've never seen panic like that before or since. The whole experience left me shaken, but it was a crucial learning moment that made me a safer instructor and diver. There was another time I had to perform CPR on a man from another boat who suffered a heart attack underwater at a surface next to us. We did 30 minutes of tandem CPR, but unfortunately, he didn't make it. There was no AED on board. That incident didn't scare me at the time, but the next day, the weight of it hit me hard, more a heavy sense of guilt than fear. Our first activity was underwater walking. We all piled into a small speedboat and took a quick 5-minute ride out to a larger boat loaded with all the gear. The setup reminded me of that time I tried snuba in the Caribbean. Oxygen tanks stayed on the surface, but instead of a regular scuba mask or these massive, heavy helmets. I guess each one weighed around 80 pounds. They also gave us rubber shoes to protect our feet from the coral. I went first. The process was straightforward. I climbed down a ladder, keeping most of my body submerged. Then they placed a rubber ring around my neck to cushion my shoulders and seal the helmet. The instant the helmet settled onto my shoulders, its weight pressed me down toward the ocean floor. It was a little intimidating, dropping quickly and feeling the pressure build fast. I swallowed and yawned repeatedly to equalize, and luckily, that helped. Breathing was tricky. Each inhale created a slight vacuum inside the helmet, so I had to pause to let air fill in before taking another breath. After me, friend 1 and friend 2 followed. Then our scuba guide descended, handing each of us a plastic bag with a piece of bread to attract fish, which was pretty fun to watch. We held onto metal handrails embedded in the seabed and followed the guide. Walking was tough, the current was stronger than expected, and those helmets were seriously heavy, but we all enjoyed the experience. As I breathed, there was this constant, loud whining noise from water rushing through the air tube. Annoying, but reassuring, it meant I was getting air. Then suddenly the noise stopped. For about 4 seconds, I was confused, but the airflow returned and I could breathe again. It happened once more, same thing. I figured maybe they were switching tanks quickly on the surface, so I didn't worry. After about 10 minutes, time flew. I noticed the guide signaling me to climb over a railing. I was confused, but did as he asked. The helmet's limited peripheral vision made it easy to lose track of my friends, so I glanced back, caught their eyes, and felt relieved we were still together. The guide led me through a narrow path between 2 coral formations. I moved slowly to avoid cuts, battling the strong current, the heavy helmet, and the occasional tug from the air hose. Then the air stopped again. At first I thought, no problem, it'll come back. But it didn't. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Panic crept in. 15 seconds. I told myself not to panic. They always say that, but I couldn't help it. My breaths got faster, then I forced myself to slow down, knowing it was the worst thing I could do. I spun around, pounding my chest to signal, I can't breathe. The guide seemed to get it and started moving away. I hope he was taking me back to the surface. I briefly considered trying to shrug off the helmet and swim up, but I didn't know if I had enough air, if the boat was directly above, or if I could even remove the helmet underwater. Plus, I worried about decompression sickness if I surfaced too fast. 30 seconds in, I felt air getting scarcer. Water started creeping into my helmet. I had to tilt my head up to catch what little air remained. Clutching the guide's arm tightly, I refused to let go. 40 seconds. I spotted the ladder to the boat and adrenaline kicked in. Almost forgetting my lack of air, I fumbled for the ladder. Distances were distorted by the helmet's slight magnification, then grabbed hold and pulled myself up. Breaking the surface was pure relief. Air rushed into my helmet, and I took the deepest breath I've ever had. Hands down, the scariest moment of my life. Definitely a 1 out of 10 experience. Would not recommend. When I was getting certified, my dive master assured me that my terrible seasickness, which I'd never experienced before, would disappear once I got in the water. What they didn't tell me was what to do if I still felt sick underwater. So, naturally, I ended up throwing up while still down there. Not sure how deep, but not too far down. I did it right through my regulator, then started choking on the water that got in. I fell behind the group, struggling to catch up while choking, and eventually had to surface faster than I should have. Lesson learned. If you throw up in your regulator, clear it out immediately. It makes all the difference. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.